Hi, I'm Jonathan Bojarski, founder of saxophonisto.com. Welcome to this special Mummer String Band edition of the series, where I talk with some of the creative minds who have helped to shape that distinctive string band sound into what it is today. Many of these folks are personal heroes of mine, immensely talented individuals who often work behind the scenes to create the incredible productions showcased at the annual Mummers Parade in Philadelphia. I am thrilled beyond thrilled to be able to speak with Chris Farr in today's interview. For those who know Mummers string bands and for those who know the top sax players in the greater Philadelphia area and beyond, Chris hardly needs an introduction. An immensely talented saxophone player, arranger, and composer, Chris has performed worldwide with some of the most famous musicians in the industry and serves on the saxophone faculty at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Despite his immense talent and impressive accomplishments, Chris is an exceptionally down-to-earth guy, extremely affable and approachable, and a wonderful teacher, respected by all. With regard to his involvement writing for string bands, Chris began arranging music for the Quaker City string band in 2006, when he took over for their extremely accomplished arranger, Fran Rothwein. In the time since, Chris has revolutionized the art of Mummer string band arranging and has become one of the winningest and most sought-after arrangers ever to be involved with string bands. I so enjoyed my conversation with Chris. We covered a lot of ground, beginning with his early days in music and his early education. We talked about his time on the road with many bands, including Maynard Ferguson and Jill Scott. And we, of course, really got under the hood with his time arranging for string bands and discussed some of his techniques and tricks of the trade. Note that at the time of our interview, Chris was arranging for the Quaker City and South Philadelphia string bands and had arranged for a number of other bands as well before that time. But since our discussion, Chris has also taken over as arranger for the Frailinger string band. It's a great chat, and I know you're really going to enjoy it. So sit back and relax. This is a great one. Enjoy my talk with Chris Farr. It's a real pleasure to have Chris Farr with me today. Chris, I've been a fan of yours for a long time now, and many of us are. We just so admire the work you've done for so many bands over the years, and your talent is just incredible. I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you today about some of your background, how you got to where you are today, learn a little bit about your story, learn a little bit about your process. So Chris, it's great to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's good to see you again and talk to you about this crazy hobby we do here.
Indeed. Well, Chris, before we get into the mummery stuff, I'd like to hear a little bit about you and your background. How did you get into music initially, and how'd that all get started?
Well, I'm the youngest of three. My oldest brother, Dan, played saxophone just as a hobby. My brother, Brian, plays drums, still professionally around the area. But the guy who got us all started was my father, because he did it as just a hobby, played in Mummers, originally started in Quaker City String Band, and was there, I think, about 15 years. And then there was a bunch of folks who left. They went to Overbrook String Band for 1 year, and my dad had known Herbie Smith, and then all of him and a bunch of other guys, a bunch of the Rivals, which is kind of a popular name in the Mummers, they all went to Frailinger. And then when they got teamed up with Herbie at the time, they kind of started to do well. But it was originally my father playing saxophone, and he also did have a little groups too, little wedding bands, and he sang. He was quite a talented dude.
So your father had a big influence on you.
Absolutely. We all kind of started instruments like around 10 years old. And when it came time to pick, this is funny that this all came together, and I still joke with Mike Quayle about this. My oldest brother played sax. My brother Brian played drums. I kind of wanted to play guitar, was my first. And my dad said, Dad, who would be the guy? He goes, well, I'll ask Mike Quayle. I said, would you teach me? And he said, no. So then I figured, all right, well, saxophone's cool. And he's like, one of his best friends in the world was Bill Garton. So Bill, who's taught hundreds, I would almost dare to say thousand people. You know what I mean? He's taught so many people. He took me on, and I studied with Bill from 4th grade to 12th grade.
Bill is certainly a name that I keep hearing come up again and again and again and again.
He was perfect. He was, and still remains to be a very effective teacher. Besides, well, he's kind of got it all. He motivates you. What seems stern initially, but you realize quickly that he wants for you what you don't even know is possible. You know what I mean? He really pulls the best out of you. And he's consistent, which is so important and hard to do. He never misses a week. He keeps impeccable records. Like he can tell me, it's like 1984, Chris, on March 7th, you were in the Labanki book. You know what I mean? And just shows how dedicated he is to his craft. And yeah, it was great, and took me, when I went into college, I can say I went back and thanked him. I was like, man, I feel so prepared.
Sounds like he was a really incredible influence and role model.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He started all the Quayle brothers and all their instruments. You know what I mean? And took like the guitar, like Michael probably so far, or Dennis so far, but Bobby, the saxophone player, stayed with him quite longer. And you can, he's like the Mr. Holland's Opus in real life, Great. Yeah. And still is, I was lucky enough to have him. I call him Uncle Bill because he's as close as any family member to my family too. You know what I mean? So it's great.
Wonderful. What happened after you were done studying with Bill? You went off to college at that point?
Yeah, I auditioned for University of Miami, and also Temple, and also University of the Arts. I got into each one, but I think at the time I was just wanting to kind of do my own thing. My brother Brian had gone to Temple. I wasn't ready to leave home, nor I got some scholarship to each one, but going to Miami, because my parents were, parents of 3 boys, I couldn't ask them to send me away. It just wasn't, 3 kids in college, not happening. And I got the best deal at University of the Arts. And when I got there, I met up with Bill Zaccagni, who was a great arranger, woodwind specialist, amazing musician. I had met him in 1988 when I was in Allstate Jazz Band. And he said, man, if you're ever thinking about colleges, why don't you check out University of the Arts? And University of the Arts was it was changing names. It was PCPA, it was College of Performing Arts, it was a lot of different names. So went there basically because of Bill, and then when I got there, I started studying with Ron Kerber. Anybody who studies with Ron says, as great as he is as a performer, he's equally, if not better, as a teacher. He's an amazing teacher. He wasn't a player who just was kind of making a buck as a teacher. No, he loves that correct. He's an amazing teacher. In anything he teaches, he could teach you to cut the grass and it would be the best class you ever taught. Really, seriously. Amazing.
How wonderful. And that's something that's a true gift, to be able to do both. Certainly so many great players that can't teach and great teachers who can't play, but to be able to do both is.
Yeah, and we remain to be like best friends. I mean, matter of fact, I had him speak at my dad's funeral. That's how close we are. You know what I mean? Amazing father. He actually made it clear to me that you didn't have to be kind of this bohemian, degenerate, guy to be a professional musician. I was like, man, he's kind of got it all together. He's a great father. He's a good husband. He's a great musician. And so as well, as great of a player as I think I really modeled a lot of things after him, because I was like, wow, I don't have to live in an apartment in New York by myself, So it's cool. It was great.
Great influence. Who were some of your other musical influences growing up? Not necessarily that you studied with, but who you listened to a lot.
Grover Washington was a big one, and I got to meet Grover, before he passed away, and actually play a couple gigs with him. Not like on his gig, but he would show up to. I was playing with Gerald Veasley a lot, and he would come out to Gerald's gig. We got to play together a lot. So the Wine Light record was a huge one to me. That record and that tune specifically, Wine Light. Sanborn, like I'm going to probably name a lot of early contemporary smooth jazz guys, which I don't listen to much anymore. And you know what? People will laugh, but Kenny G was huge, and people can hate on him as much as they want. But Ron Kerber calls it the great Kenny G scare. You know what I mean? Like at that time, there was like 36 saxophone majors when Kenny G was big. Not when I started, but by the time I was done University Arts, there was just a mass Kenny G. I remember wearing out the Kenny G live record. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was big and he was great. Really good stuff. I mean, the first Kenny G recording, just Kenny G, was fantastic. I think it was released in '82.
Yeah.
And
after that was what, like
stuff.
Duotones or something?
I think so, yeah.
But, a lot of saxophone players won't admit that. And I'm here to tell you, whether you want to call it a guilty pleasure or not. I mean, he kept me interested until, the next big influence, until I discovered Michael Brecker and Coltrane. And I figured I kind of did it backwards. I think a lot of people do it backwards. They discover the really popular players of whatever time that is, and then they go back and do their research and say like, oh, if you're going to check out Coltrane, then you're going to check out, Wayne Shorter and then, I mean, if you're going to check out Brecker, then you're going to check out Coltrane and Wayne Shorter and Sonny Rollins, and you're going to go back even further, and you say Dexter Gordon, and then before that, you're going to say Lester Young, Prez, you know what I mean? So you're going to do, so I did it absolutely backwards. When I heard Brecker, I was like, I know this is great. I don't know if I dig it, but I think I better learn to dig it because it was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting that you did it in reverse, but you got to the same place and then you found your own way.
For sure. And then huge to me was Sonny Rollins and Sonny Stitt, both the Sonnies for sure. And if you did those two guys, you have to say Charlie Parker too. Charlie Parker to me, like if you're talking about the biggest, most influential jazz musicians ever, you probably have to say Louis Armstrong first, and you probably have to say Charlie Parker second, because he changed the language. Louis Armstrong changed the language, but he changed the language. I mean, I have records where he's a guest soloist with a big band, and everybody stands up and they sound very arpeggiated, very consonant, very diatonic. And then Bird stands up, and he knows exactly what he's doing, and his double time, his articulation, just on a saxophone level. And then his bebop language was just like, this is like 25 years just went by on the same record date. So Bird has to be it.
Changed everything, right? For sure.
Oh, completely. I feel like everybody jazz-wise kind of before comes into Bird and then jumps back out from Bird. You know what I mean? It's just like amazing.
So you studied at University of the Arts and then you stayed on?
Yeah, I studied there for 4 years. And meanwhile, I was doing my K through 12 master's in education. They had a master's degree in 5 years. So in the first 4 years, you really maxed out your credits and took your prerequisite courses so that you could knock out your master's in teaching. It was an MAT degree in the 5th year. So after the 4 years, I have a bachelor's in saxophone. Then in my 5th year, I have my master's in arts and teaching, which is a K through 12 not certification, but it allows you to teach, and then you have to get certified. But I've never taught K through 12, except for private lessons. So yeah, I graduated in 95. At the end of 95, this was another pivotal moment that a friend of mine had gotten a gig with Maynard Ferguson. So there was a time where one of the saxophone players on Maynard Ferguson in the middle of a tour left. And they were in Baltimore, right outside of Baltimore, Maryland somewhere. And the piano player said, well, my buddy's a good player back in Philly. He can be here in an hour and a half. And I went. This is fall 95, right after I graduated. I went on the gig and I sight read the gig. I got the music literally like 24 hours before, and I sight read the gig.
Wow.
And I must have done pretty well. I will say this. I didn't read it perfect, and I don't know that anybody would have, but I have a good musical intuition as to know how to not make a big mistake to really, screw things up. And I did finish that tour, only had like 3 or 4 gigs left. And he was at the end of the tour, he goes, well, we start up in January. The gig's yours if you want it.
Wow.
So in '96, I stayed on with him consistently for about a year. Then I left, and then I came back and did some other subbing. Like we went to Europe a few times, and then when I came back, I subbed on the first Montreux Jazz Festival in Tokyo. So I went to Japan with him, and that was like my graduate playing.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was like some of the best players from around the country, and I don't know that I was really ready for it, but it was sink or swim, so it really helped me improve. And then when you come home from that, Maynard, it's kind of like a badge of honor. Like, you play with Maynard, you know what I mean? It's like this weird kind of thing, and but it really propelled me on to like, oh, you play with Maynard, you must be all right, you know what I mean? So came home.
Yeah, what an incredible experience that must have been. Wow.
Yeah, great. Then I started playing with Gerald Veasley. He was playing some contemporary stuff. Come beginning of after Y2K, right after that, I started gigging with the Roots.
Really good, Chanel. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show. Give it up. One, two, three, four. Yeah.
2004, I started with Jill Scott, and I was on Jill Scott's band for like eight and a half years. That hooked up with the bassist and became the music director, Adam Blackstone. And Adam has hired me. I've worked with Adam on so many projects, with Rihanna, with Eminem. He was, what else has he recently done? He was music director for this show called The Four that was on. He's done the last 3 or 4 seasons of The Masked Singer. So I'll do tracks in my house that are put into Pro Tools and are played out in California.
Very cool.
I mean? Do a lot of, that's why we'll check out my studio here at home. I do saxophone and horn tracks here all the time. And I do a lot of ads for another friend of mine, Dan Zank, who he does a lot of TWA ads and Super Bowl ads. And so it's super fortunate. I mean, I work hard, but super fortunate.
Yeah, you've had a really varied experience. And I want to get into more of your commercial writing too. I want to delve deeper into that. So I'm going to put a little placeholder in my mind and get back there. Tell me, so when did you get back to University of the Arts on faculty?
So as soon as I got off Maynard Ferguson's band, the saxophone department was so big. When I started, the saxophone department was only 4 people, students. And then at that time, when I graduated and then went away, it was, like I said, it was huge. It was over 30 students. Ron Kerber was the head of the saxophone department. He goes, I need people. And Ron hired me in like spring semester 97. And then, since then, they've had 4 or 5 saxophone teachers there all the time. Currently, it's myself, Tony Celicandro, Ron Kerber, a young, great saxophonist, Mark Allen, and Larry McKenna. So the 5 of us are the teachers there. So it's cool.
Wonderful, wonderful program with great instructors. And
we're really fortunate there. And it's really a
talented.
Great brotherhood. We're very collegial, and we're all fans of each other's too. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, wonderful. Want to talk a little bit about your arranging, or a lot about your arranging now. So when did you start writing music before you got to doing things for the bands in Philly? But when did you actually start writing your first arrangements?
We had to in college, right? And so we had to do, I remember orchestration class. I had to write for the orchestra, strings and everything. And then we had to write big band stuff. I had to write saxophone section stuff. But it was always, I always felt like early on I was just fulfilling the assignment. I never considered myself an arranger. But what I was thankful for is that I had to do it in a time where music notation wasn't the norm. So I had to hand copy all the orchestra parts. I had to hand copy all the scores and everything. So very thankful for that, because a lot of the programs do things that people don't even know they do and why they do them. The placement of accidentals, the spacing in a bar, how long a stem on a note should be. You know what I mean? All that calligraphy, all that, we learned all the rules of that. And then because I think a lot of people with music notation use it as a necessity. For me, it's just a tool, and I know what it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, so many people like a short downbeat. They'll write this 8th note with an 8th rest. And it's like, well, no, actually, the best way to probably do that in most cases is a staccato quarter note, less rest than the bar. You know what I mean? So we can talk more about that. But then after that, I just kind of grew more balls than brains. You know what I mean? I was just like, man, can everybody who's an arranger be smarter than me? You know what I mean? And you just have to get enough balls to say, like, your first stuff is going to suck. It's just going to suck. And that's okay. You know what I mean? And then you figure out. So after college, after Maynard's band, I started to see like, oh my God, maybe I could make make some money at this. And the first person who ever asked me, I think I shared this with you on the phone, was Steve Moyer. And I turned him down. I was like, man, I don't really think I'm your guy. I had only paraded with Fralinger for 2 years. I was in the band in 85 and 86.
This is the Fralinger String Band, winners in their division many times over, including this past New Year's Day, and it's here at their clubhouse in South Philly where they rehearse. On this particular night, they were getting ready for the annual Philadelphia String Band's Show of Shows.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And then I didn't I might have hung around a band, but I didn't do anything with Mummers till 2007. So it was like 21 years, and I was just doing my career. You know what I mean? And then Fran Rothwein asked me in 2007 to finish. He had some of Quaker's Viking theme at the time done, but he had some family hardships. And I kind of picked up the ball from him in like October. So the clock was ticking, you know what I mean? So it was like, jump in, man.
So up until that point, you really weren't at all connected with string bands per se, except for the 85, 86 and Fralinger.
That was it.
And then you kind of got pulled in in 2007.
They did this they called it Old Man River, and then they did the silent movie theme. And then I kind of split the scene. I was way in. For sure I was going to be the next Pele. I was playing soccer and, whatever. But yeah, so I didn't do anything except hang every once in a while and, party. I didn't do anything musically with string bands until 2007. So everybody thinks, once you're in, you're always in. But I try to explain, I was like, man, there's 21 years I wasn't around. So it's kind of funny.
Before I get more into your string band writing, who were some of the arrangers that you've listened to over the years, non-mummer arrangers that have inspired you the most? Do you have people that you particularly...
I played so much big band stuff. We had talked about Lenny Niehaus, you know what I mean? And boy, it'd be easier for me to just say that I studied so much big band from Micah Benny, Thad Jones and Mel Lewis. So Thad Jones, that band, a lot, really dug his stuff. Some of the GRP writers.
Oh yeah, those GRP big band CDs were
great. Frank
awesome.
Mantooth is another great writer who has his own big band like in the Midwest, but he's got a great textbook out that I've definitely used. Boy, Bob Brookmeyer is another one, a very dissonant but beautiful, dark. And then kind of Bob Brookmeyer's protege, Maria Schneider, who Maria is right, he's just gorgeous now, like still out there. Yeah, the list goes on and on. And from most recently, I play sometimes with the Pennsylvania Ballet. So the last piece of music that still is ringing, I haven't done it maybe a year and a half ago I did it. I played Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. And it's cool because it's a 3-hour ballet that has a dedicated tenor saxophone part in it.
Oh, does it really?
Oh, yeah. You should check it out. It's on some ridiculous, once again, life-changing music. All these tonal pivots that go on in this thing are just, and it's over 3-hour work. And Ron Kerber had done it before. Ron couldn't do this particular run, so they did it. And I will say, another huge learning experience for me to really do that gig. The dress rehearsal, there were sometimes I was totally lost, I'll tell you. But then I got it together real quick. But beyond that, I bought 2 different versions of it. And I'm telling you, this music is just ridiculous. Ridiculous. Yeah. So if you ever get a chance, check it out.
Absolutely. That's a great recommendation.
Yeah.
let's talk about Quaker City then in 2006 when you started writing the Vikings.
Mhm.
You really hadn't arranged much for string bands, if anything, really, at that point, right?
I
You'd
didn't
done a
even
lot of
write a
writing
street
for
tune.
other groups, but
Yeah, I didn't
what
even
was
write.
that transition like?
Oh man, it was weird. I didn't even write a street tune. I remember with that particular theme, they were doing. So this was before I signed on to do the whole routine, and I can't remember who reached out. It could have been my brother Danny. Danny had left Frowninger at the time and was in Quaker City at the time. So they were doing this version of Norwegian Wood, and it's a Beatles tune, I guess, originally, right?
Sure.
And then the big band version was Buddy Rich. So they wanted to do a kind of a more jazz waltz. So I remember doing something that was a real segment, just a segment of like a super sax kind of version for them. So that was the first thing I ever wrote. And that was good because I could see like, okay, it wasn't that it couldn't be played, but it wasn't what was going to sound really good for them. I think the big thing about arranging is knowing who you're writing for. Huge, huge. You can't, there's certain registers you stay away from and certain things. We can get into all those specifics, but I think if I have any advantage over a lot of the arrangers that you talk to is that I am a saxophone player first. So that's a huge advantage. Everything from articulation to registers to, this dynamic is not going to work if you want the tenors to come in on a low B. You know what I mean? It's just not going to work. So, and then I jumped right in, and Franny needed help, and I took on, and so it was really from 0 to 60.
I remember hearing that score and thinking to myself, my God, that's one of the thickest sounding string band arrangements I've ever heard.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was just blown away, and I think most people were. I mean, at the time, obviously John Winega and continues to be a monster, and I had between John's stuff, and this was just very different from John's in an equally wonderful, amazing way. But just the thickness of that harmony that you did was just something I'd not really heard before. Sounds like you just kind of started writing and did did you do some trial and error to see what sorts of things Quaker could do and what sounded good?
I'm trying to think. I wish we talked about like switching over. I think that was an encore score that I did on Encore, and I wish I had kept all the versions of that because there was a lot of tweaks, but not crazy man. Franny, I think you have to double check with him. I think he might have had a minute done. And they had, I think, most of the tunes in place that they wanted to use. So then it was just me arranging what the tunes that they had already chosen. I mean, I could be, misremembering, so, but I think that's what I remember. And then I think we might have even tweaked a little things of the first minute that Franny had written, because we saw that, when you get multiple arrangers involved, it can sound very disjunct. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's like,
Right.
all of a sudden, oh man, what happened there? And then that, you know what I mean? So.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So you kind of smoothed it all over and made it, because it was not obvious that there were two arrangers in that score.
Franny was very cool and very open. Sometimes it's hard to turn over your work and say, like, have at it. You know what I mean? He was very, very cool. But so Franny and I had a working relationship, which was cool for a long time. You know what I mean? And I stayed on. I just stayed on since they've been the consistent band since I started this whole thing. So.
Yeah, and then you guys, I guess, with time, as your name got out there, that, oh, who's this guy Chris Farr writing for Quaker? Then word got out, and you started writing for, obviously, South Philly eventually, and you mentioned to me Polish American and Uptown and
Woodland.
Others along the way. One year you did 5 bands, you said?
Yeah, it was at least 1 year. It might have been 2. In there was Woodland. I did Hegeman. I did your old band Uptown.
Yep.
I think a couple years. What's the one that doesn't have Pennsport? Like there's times, and I watch it play, like, wait a minute, that sounds so. Oh, I wrote that. You know what I mean? Because there's probably somewhere 35, 36 themes that have been gone out, and there's a great, if you ever wanted to do a trivia question, just ask, what was the 2 themes? What arranger wrote 2 Viking themes and 2, what was the other one? Hawaiian themes? I can't remember, but there's like 2 themes that a band would never do 2 Viking themes. But I wrote 2 of them. I could be in the Mummer Trivial Pursuit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've definitely been. And how do you find that to be when a band comes to you and says, we want to do, let's just, throw out the weirdest arrangement. I mean, when you're like the hired arranger, you kind of have to work with that, right? I mean,
yeah, you're forced to. I've come to the realization that I let them call most of the shots, and then I'll kind of come in and throw my 2 cents. I want to hear everything that they've got. I want choice of tunes is a big one. But I really think you can do anything with any tune. And that's why I think people, are you really arranging, or are you just transcribing? You know what I mean? There is a big difference. And a lot of arrangers claim to be arrangers, and they hear a version and they're just doing their version of a version that they heard. They're not really arranging. Like, they are arranging to a certain extent, but not really expanding. You know what I mean? Like, I can honestly say you might hear some things that I wrote that are referenced on records, but there's definitely been some stuff that I would like to think nobody's played that tune that way.
No question about that, based on what I've heard with my ears from your writing.
And sometimes doing a second theme, you get it right the second time. Like, I think I wrote a clown theme for Hegeman, but then the second one I wrote was for Quaker City, and they won with it. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, I was going to say,
maybe I worked out the kinks on that one.
Probably nice to have a chance to do a redo. Not that you needed a redo necessarily, because the first one was great, but it's nice to be able to approach things again.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Sometimes, like, oh, I can't believe I'm writing again. But I really think, like,
another Viking routine, really?
Some themes, there's some music is so plentiful. Like, was it 2 years ago that South Philly did this, like, haunted Western thing?
Right.
And I'm like, well, there's a whole, spaghetti Western music out there that people haven't really played a lot of. You know what I mean? Like the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Ennio Morricone music. And I was like, well, I did some of the, like, Yellow Rose of Texas, all that kind of shit was in there. But I was like, oh man, this could be, because, all that kind of stuff was dark and still cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very unique approach to that music. No question. Very, very cool. So given this tremendous variety of bands you've written for, that has got to be awfully challenging, writing for bands of a Quaker City level and bands of maybe lesser ability levels. How do you adjust for that?
I think I'm a pretty good evaluator of what a band can do. The struggle is that every band always wants it harder. And I try to say, I don't think that's for you. You know what I mean? And sometimes, it really strains the relationship. You know what I mean? So what I try to do is do a little bit of research and see what they've done in the past. And actually, I'll try and tag like certain parts. Like, man, that part of that routine, that's where you sound good. That's your wheelhouse. You know what I mean? You
Yep.
had the tenors doing this. You had this. Maybe there's a key that worked. You know what I mean? So I really try to do a little bit of research. And then I try to go up and just hear the band, where they at currently. You know, send me a recording. And sometimes the relationship isn't right. You know, I wrote a couple themes for Woodland, and the minute I didn't write for them, they won. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying I was right for everybody either.
Yep. It's a personal thing sometimes.
Yeah.
So you've written, did you say 36?
About
36?
I don't know if that's accurate. I can tell you it's for sure over 30, and I would venture to say it's somewhere around between 34 and 36.
I know it's a lot to keep track of, but of the ones you've written, what are the ones that come to mind as some of your favorites, or some that you feel were most successful? Not necessarily ones that have won, but ones that you said, well, I really felt like I did something different with that, or I liked how I harmonized differently. Anything come to mind?
Well, one of the strongest ones, I guess, not necessarily in prize, was Quaker City's Jewish routine like 2 years ago. Problem was it was 2 degrees.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things that were like, there was some slow down stuff where I had accordions written in 3-part harmony with Jimmy Fox playing clarinet over it. And it just, man, you know, what can you do in 2 degrees with a wooden clarinet? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we had backup plans, but we figured he was doing okay with it. And he played it fine. There was really, as far as energy and flow, the Jewish music is so energetic and so beautifully dark and passionate. And I think that's what John Warnega did so well too. You know, he really wrote. So I like that one. This past year might have been one of my favorites, the one I wrote for Quaker City also, because there was truly tunes that nobody had any idea about. They were themes from like the Prince of Egypt that I expanded into full tunes. And then there's one tune that isn't, I mean, it was a tune, it's completely an original thing. When they went into this like Bollywood, in that theme, it was influenced by a tune by Maynard Ferguson called Ganesha, which is, it was written on, Maynard always did tunes based on Indian ragas.
And for those of you who kind of know my ways and things, I'm very interested in the spiritual and the music of India.
So like these 2 harmonic minor scales, it'll be like, right? It'll be like a C harmonic minor scale and a G harmonic. So, you know what I mean? So, right, already you're there. You know what I mean? With that scale, you're in the place. You know what I mean? So there's literally a lot of original music. But people will say, what's that tune? I said, I can't tell you. You know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to keep the secret. It doesn't have a name.
And I think that's great that, you know, it's taken 120 years for string bands. I don't know if string bands have been playing that quite that many years, but to get to doing more original material, which you've kind of done. You ventured into that. I mean, all of arranging is a little bit of composing too, but you've kind of taken it a little bit further, it sounds.
Yeah, well, you need a strong melody, because a strong melody will make you believe that tune existed, in my opinion. You know, it's like, man, I've heard that before. Well, no, it's just strong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's memorable and it sticks with you. You know what I mean? So the minute we did that, they were like, man, we're on board with this. They're like, what is that? I said, and I'll tell you, the weirdest combination of music was Quaker did this winter theme.
Oh, sure.
So there's some very recognizable, like it was A Night on Bald Mountain or whatever, like that kind of stuff was in there. But in the middle, there's this fast piece. It's the water show music from Epcot, and they found it. They're like, wouldn't this be great? I'm like, yeah, this sounds great. What is it? It's like, well, it has nothing to do with winter. It's actually one of the hottest places in the world. And it's the symphony music behind that water show in Epcot Center. So that theme came off amazing. They were blown away with the music. And I remember going in not feeling great about it just because the process was so disjunct. But sometimes, you know, good accidents happen, you know what I mean? Or awkward processes, you know, produce this kind of great shit. And I didn't realize how much they would like it.
And it turned out amazingly. I mean, you know, Chris, one of the things that just, I have to say to you is, you know, I feel like every year you sound different, and it's amazing to me.
That's
such a challenge.
That's a goal of mine, John. That's
I mean, my next question for you was, how do you feel others would describe your arranging style? And I'm going to just jump in there and say, one thing I have to say about Chris Farr is that I feel like, I mean, I can pick up on certain things that you do, you know, certain things that you do periodically, but every year and every band just feels very different to me, which is something I truly love about your work.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I think it has a lot to do with, you know, 5 years ago, I didn't play with the Pennsylvania Ballet Prokofiev, but then I did. So as my professional career brings these different influences, I don't experience them, let them go away. And I do have to give a lot of credit to Jimmy Rivell. Jimmy Rivell and I team attacked the banjo features. So Jimmy probably gives me 90% of the layout of how he's a very creative player. And also I always say, you speak banjo, man. You know, I know I'm going to give you, the way I help Jimmy with it is I probably suggest chords, I suggest grooves, but he's one of the finest banjo players that have ever done this. He's got a great section, and we've been friends forever. So we team attack that, you know what I mean? So, and he also helps South Philly too. So while I could write one, but he really can put the finishing touch on what they can do. The flash, you know what I mean?
With that in mind, what about rhythm and drums? Do you do a lot of that yourself?
I do all of it. I do all of it. My brother Brian being a drummer, I always had drums now. So I do have a good clue as far as that. And I've been complimented, which is nice to say. It's like, wow, you teach saxophone, but you teach drums more than anything. I do. And there is very little that isn't written. I mean, you seem pretty well knowledgeable. What arrangements did you like that I've written? Which ones stand out to you?
I think a lot of the ones you mentioned. I mean, the two Quaker in recent years, the Jewish theme was amazing. The winter theme was amazing. But Vikings, I mean, just the impact it had on me, because it was the first time I had heard that sound. It was just different. It was just totally different.
They actually, you know, that was in the heart of Fraunger doing well. And I remember Quaker won in, I think, one of the music categories that year. And they got dumped in one suit category. They didn't do well, or they would have won that year. But no question taken away. Fraunger was really good players. John's a really great arranger, great musician. You know, not taking anything away from John. John really writes some interesting stuff.
Yeah, he really does. He's fantastic. I want to turn a little bit to your process now, and we've kind of touched on it already, but talking a little bit about how you write a New Year's score, and just get into some of the nuance of your process. I know you said planning it out, you know, the theme committee will often give you a list of tunes. Kind of how do you work with the theme committee? How does that typically come together? How much back and forth is there? I guess it depends on the band a little bit. And then also, how do you like to write your routine? Do you like to write it in chronological order? Do you kind of skip around a bit when you're feeling the
I skip around
inspiration?
a lot. I skip around, but a lot of that has to do with the band and how organized they are. I will say this, South Philly has been successful in recent years because I identify with their process the best. They are super organized. Jimmy Brown, well, I don't know if you know Jimmy Brown, does their show. This guy is so dedicated and runs amazing meetings, and he has these printed out outlines, and we're able to fill in like this tune will work great here, this and is still flexible with it. So a lot of times South Philly score comes exactly from beginning to end. Unless I have a really every once in a while I do have a really hot idea about, oh, check this tune out. I know this is great and I know this is your ending or this is this part. So I meet, if the bands want to, I meet with them a lot. You know what I mean? More than probably I want to, but it proves to be the difference maker in the end.
Now, do you have a preference when you actually sit down to start putting down notes on the paper? Do you like to start in a particular spot? What do you tend to do? Do you start at the beginning, or do you tend to write the finale first, or just kind of?
No, I mean, I start at the beginning. And I'll start with an outline, like the actual list of the tunes in order. And most of what I write is being sung in my head. I don't let the keyboard tell me what to do because I'm not a keyboard player. I can play some piano, but I'm not a keyboard player. So that would limit me, right? Saxophone, even though I'm a good saxophone player, even that isn't the most natural thing the body can do. It's singing. So I'll sing rhythms all day long. You know, I remember like when they were like South Philly was going booty wee digga digga digga, and I'm thinking boom 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. So I'm singing the accompaniment, and sometimes I actually get my phone and be like, "Oh, let me sing that rhythm in," and then I'll put the you know what I mean. I'll put the chords in then, but the rhythm's already hit.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's sung, and before I sit down, I already kind of have an idea in my head of what I'm going for.
That's what I was going to ask you. How often do you use your phone to just kind of record ideas, even if it's not necessarily a routine you're working on right now, but if you get something in your head, you kind of keep a lot of stuff in your phone?
All the time.
Yeah.
Voice recordings of whether it's a lick I heard somebody play or whatever, but a lot of times it's like, oh, wait a minute, let me just capture this so I don't. Here's another interesting thing. For some reason, 95% of what I write in the morning is kept. I don't know whether my ideas just suck after 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the day, but I still write stuff productive at night. But man, there's something about being fresh in the morning that it's just like, whether I was dreaming about it or whatever, I just wake up, the stuff in the morning seems to stick. I'm more productive in the morning. Period.
I can relate to that. And I think, I'm going to ask more arrangers about that as well, because I think everybody has their hour or two of power, and some people it's the morning, some people it's at night, but just that the creative juices flow. And for you, it sounds like it's that early morning.
Oh man, it's amazing. It's really funny. I mean, I remember talking to my wife, Lydia, I said, man, I wrote this last night. This really sucks. You know what I mean? So I'm also never afraid to change anything. I change all the time. 4 bands. Like last year, South Philly did that gypsy traveling carnival thing.
Yep.
So their whole ending with the Ferris wheel getting hit by the cannon shot this thing, and the Ferris wheel comes off its thing and rolls across. Like that came in November, and we had music in that place. And I think sometimes arrangers get married to, well, that music was great. Yeah, but their visual was greater. Yep. So you gotta go with it. And Jimmy Brown and other bands, not just Jimmy Brown, but other people say like, no, don't mess with that music. I'll come up with something good because that music is killing right there. You got to step back from your own stuff and check your ego at the door and say, no, man, that visual, that's killing. So it's my job I remember the beautiful theme that South Philly did was this Chinese theme a few years back. And I watched their ballad and I had it in 1 key. And Jimmy brought out, they have this huge, beautiful fan that they brought out halfway through. I'm like, how could I didn't know that. How could I not have a key change there with, and I said, Jim, you're going to kill me, but this is like the last week of November. We have to have a music rehearsal because I'm not serving the visual well enough.
And that's great that you can do that, because I think it would be very difficult for a lot of people to make those musical changes once you get so committed to what you've done. So that's Hats off to
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And I can do it. I can do it pretty quick. That's part of why I'm glad I was trained in this, and I do work hard at. Some people just work slow. I work quick. I
That's what I was going to
really do.
ask you. You feel you're a pretty fast writer?
Yeah, I mean, I can write. I mean, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I can write a theme in a weekend. I
Wow.
really can. It's not rocket science at this point. Because somebody told me this, who was it, Bill Garton, and that comes with a price. I'm probably the most expensive too, but do you want to pay the plumber who knows where to fix the pipe, or the guy who doesn't know? You're going to pay a lot more money. Meanwhile, water's leaking.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I know where to hit the pipe. You know what I mean? Or I can give you 10 different ways. Like, I have 5 different ways you can play this tune. You know what I mean? It's not just one. It's not just staying Kenton's way. You know what I mean? So
Let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of how many sax parts you use, and has that evolved over time from 2007 Vikings to present? Let's just keep it with larger bands now.
yeah, 5,
South Philly
usually,
and Quaker.
Usually 5 harmony parts, like 3 alto parts, 2 tenor parts. I usually, every once in a while, I'll split the bari bass and basses. I think some of the mistakes some arrangers have is if your band isn't close and you only have 2 or 3 guys playing a part, and they're behind a headpiece or have this big suit on, and they're not the strongest players, you might as well kiss that part goodbye. So maybe part of the thickness or the bottomness of the bands is that I have 13 guys in Quaker playing a bass line. Now, that can produce huge issues with intonation and interpretation, but that's what you got to work on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So every once in a while, I'll split them in fifths to really make like a powered kind of fifth in the bottom of a chord. You know what I mean?
Right.
And sometimes I'll pull the bari off and make them be the lowest voice of all the, you know what I mean? But it's a definitely numbers game, but it's kind of written like a traditional sax section.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I use a lot of drop voicings, drop 2, drop 3, for those do you want me to get into quick nuts and bolts of that?
Sure, you can talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a C minor 7 chord and it's let's just keep it like a B flat on top, a G, an E flat, and a C. Let's say it's a sus chord and it's over F. So now I have this B flat, a G, an E flat, and a C. This second note down, G, that's really a high note, let's just say, for whatever voice is there. That's called drop 2. You drop the second note in the voicing down an octave. So now you get B flat, skip over the G, your next note is the E flat, then it's C, and the G is down here. And then you're F. It does 2 things. It puts usually this G in a better register for the instrument. It also creates space for the melody. You know what I mean? So sometimes you want it tight, sometimes you want it, and you can do drop 2, you can drop 3. It all depends. You know what I mean? And it's not right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just choice, textures. So voicings are very key to thickness too.
Mm-hmm. How do you like to pick keys for particular songs?
Depends where it's coming from and where it's going to. First of all, is it going to work on who's playing the melody is a huge one. Okay, is it going to put the altos in a stupid range, or can I make it work with the tenors carrying it, or the bass is carrying it and the alto's doing something else? But then also, if the previous tune was in B flat, I don't want to stay there in a routine. If you're talking about a street tune, then it's specifically how's it gonna lay on the instruments. But if it's in a routine, then you're playing the game of flow and energy, and do I want to modulate? And then if not that, do I want to modulate within that one tune? And how do I want to modulate? So yeah, maybe B flat is the best key. So maybe that's the last key I played in. Maybe I started in A flat, so some of my routines do get into some hairy keys, but that's just because now when you put that key of A next to the key of B flat, you got that lift that you wanted.
Yeah.
So depends on the situation. Street tune, maybe one thing. In a routine, could be a whole nother circumstances, and then where you're heading too.
How do you like to think about reharmonization? And
Well, that's a
just
big one.
thinking about reharm. That is a big question.
Yeah. So, boy, there's traditional, like, let's say theoretical jazz reharm, which a lot of people just throw random chords at it. And it really has to do with the root movement. So let's say, I could do random chords. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of ways to harmonize this C as a melody note. It could be C major, or it could be D flat major 7, or it could be B flat 9. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or 13. So sometimes I'll throw just a random chord in there just for effect, but it's never, I shouldn't even say random, it's never random. It's coming from someplace. And what a lot of people don't realize is that your reharm's only going to be as strong as your root movement too. So if I want to end up somewhere, there's a way to get to it. So whether it's the circle of fifths or circle of fourths, however you think about it, whether it's half step movement, while this one note is being held, what am I doing? Am I going underneath? Am I going? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then, okay, how do I make all those chords work? Because I like that root movement now.
Right. Right.
Does that make sense?
Of course.
Because some people do reharm and it's not related to the root movement. And you're like, why doesn't it have the power or the effect or the creativity, like the impact that carries across? Oh, shit, that was great. Well, yeah, because you had all that working for you. So
yeah, because it makes sense. It makes sense to the ear.
There's a big technique called backcycling, which would take forever to, that's another video.
I know we're running a little short on time, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of the other string band arrangers out there who have had an influence on you or who you respect, and any particular routines that have come to mind as well. Those were, had a really big effect on me, or particular writers.
I have to pay credit to Herbie Smith, because Herbie was my first exposure to this. And when you listen to stuff pre-Herbie, you can see, he was like the Charlie Parker of string bands. Like 25 years went by, not only in how he arranged, but even his choice of music. You know what I mean? For Quaker to do for Fralinger to do like Gershwin and Cole Porter, and man, just some classic, or a Mardi Gras theme, you know what I mean? So Herbie was definitely early on. Probably the other two guys, big ones, would be Mike Quayle. And I work with Mike a lot because he's definitely such a strong chord player, strong guitarist. He's always got some great reharm ideas. And John Warnega. John really, in my opinion, he raised the game to a whole nother level for string bands. And people were chasing him for a long time. They just were. So John definitely, I've listened to some of his stuff. It's like, man, that's really creative, those keys you do, or the inner voice movement. Yeah, so let's say Herbie, Mike Quayle, and John.
As long as we're talking about Herbie, I want to hear your Larry and Herbie story that you told me the other day. Yeah,
so I'm sure Herbie might be able to tweak it for you, or Larry too, but my remembrance of it was Larry, is
Larry
world
McKenna.
class. Yeah, Larry McKenna is world class. And, he didn't mean any disrespect, but it wasn't his favorite thing to sit down and watch a 3-hour, probably at the time, even longer Mummers Day parade. Who the hell knows? You know what I mean? But Larry's wife loved to watch it. So Larry is such a sweet gentleman, and he's like, well, I guess I'm watching it. You know what I mean? And then he said at some point, this arranger came in, and he could tell this guy kind of knew what he was doing. And he's like, holy smokes. Now I can watch this all of a sudden. Like, it's a lot easier for me to watch. Fast forward years later, where there's like this community of retired jazz musicians, and most of them they're not professionals, but Larry's a hero to everybody. So Larry was playing in this band, and Herbie was playing baritone sax. And Herbie was kind of saying, you know, man, you're a hero of mine. I love the way you play. He goes, no, man, you're that guy. You're a hero of mine. You made the parade worth watching, more or less. It's such a great
That's a great story.
Yeah, isn't it?
Well, Chris, it is really just such a pleasure to talk with you, and your story is inspiring and so educational and interesting, and I really have so enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
I really thank you for taking the time to talk about everything that you've experienced over the years, and we've got so much to cover, so I would love to continue this at some point in the future, but
anytime.
The ground we covered today was just fantastic, and I so enjoyed it.
Well, thanks for doing this, and thanks for organizing this. I think it's great to archive, and I think it can only help the tradition, because it's dwindling. You know what I mean? It's dwindling, and it if it's going to carry on, we gotta spread the word a little bit and show this cool part of it, not the, you know what I mean? The cool part of it is the creativity, and the celebratory part is the same, but the creativity is really how I choose and want to spend my life, just creating. That's why I do it. If it wasn't creative, then I could go out and play in a wedding band. And I just don't want to do that anymore. I'd rather create something new than play, you know, another cool and again, like celebration one more time.
Well, that creativity is so inspiring to so many of us, and the reason why so many of us do it as well. So thank you for what you bring to our wonderful craft, and for changing it forever. What you've done has changed it forever.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you, Chris.
Okay, John.
I so enjoyed my conversation with Chris. Such a great interview, so much fun to talk with him. All the ground we covered, talking about his early days and some of his tricks of the trade for arranging. So fun. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. It's great to share these stories with all of you, and I hope you're enjoying them. So as always, let me know if you're enjoying them. Reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and please share these with others who you feel may be interested in seeing them as well. I'm having so much fun doing these interviews. All right, until next time, I'll see you soon. Take care.